Okay, hello. We're in week 3 and then week 4, looking at chapter 2. And we're looking at culture here, and culture is really important in regards to how we see not only our own country, but in other countries all have culture. And as far as basically what we're going to be doing is looking at culture and society in a changing world. So we're going to see the relationship between the two, society and culture, and then see how that varies a wee bit across the world. And we're also going to look at some of the components of what are the parts of what make up culture. And then next week, we're going to look instead at technology, cultural change, and diversity. And then we're going to look at some of the theories, or the theorists. As you recall, it's like wearing sunglasses with different colors, and each has a different view of the society and world around us. So we're going to look at the theoretical perspectives. And I'll just touch briefly on some of the potential for future in culture in the future, what we could consider potential. Now, some of the things you can think about while going through this video would be, what part does culture play in shaping people, you and I, and the societal relations that we have with other people and how we participate with them. So what role does culture play in this? You know, what is the essential components of what makes culture culture? So what are the main pieces? And we're going to be doing that stuff today. And then we're going to be looking at also in terms of, well, how does subcultures, countercultures reflect directly on society, and what role do they play? And then lastly, we'll look at a little bit at the sociological perspectives. I want to be able to sort of give an overview of how do the different theorists look at what the role of culture is in society. And that's what we'll do in week 4. All right? So let's get on with this. We're going to start with the introduction to what is culture, look at some of the parts of what culture is for this week in week 3. Good luck, and look forward to seeing you next week too.
Okay, let's start with a definition of what is culture. Culture is the knowledge, the language, values, customs, and material objects that are passed from one person to the next, often within our own family, but not exclusively, and from one generation to the next in a human group or society. So remember, society is a large social grouping that occupies the same geographic territory and is subject to the same political authority and dominant cultural expectations. So culture would be all those things that we sort of bring together and what makes us say we are part of, a cultural norm. So outdoor winter activities, the Mounties, the celebration of disabilities in some respects, and certainly diversity. Hockey, of course, our government, our money is unique, and our flag, all of which are things are cultural expectations or things that we call symbols of culture. Now, culture is a learned phenomenon. It's not biological. It's not something you're born with. Cultural differences between nations and between countries it's a learned experience, and the process of learning culture is a well-studied sociological phenomenon. There's another definition we could say that the common denominator that makes the actions of an individual intelligible to a group. So when I know when I put my hand out that it's going to be shaken, because that's what our culture says about what that signals. So it's an important element about what makes us secure and comfortable. In terms of knowing who we are as a people. In our culture, shelter is a universal type of material culture, having a home. But it comes in a wide variety of shapes and form. Not everybody's homes look the same. We have apartments, we have single home dwellings, we have very, big homes and very well-appointed homes. What might, for some of the reasons, be similarities and the differences you see across cultural examples. So all cultures don't define what is good shelter to be the same. And so culture is unique from place to place. So if we look at material and non-material culture and what it is, material culture is all the physical or the tangible creations that any member of a society and group of the society can either make, use, or share. Now, non-material culture by definition is the abstract or the intangible. So non-material would be our language, our beliefs, values, rules of behavior, the side of the road we drive on, for example, the way we greet people, the gender rules, what it is to be masculine, what it is to be feminine, our laws, the family patterns in marriages or common law or single-parented family or any number of groupings that we have in Canada that has been seen as normal, our political system, our faiths. These are all non-material culture. Now, under material culture, we have what's called technology, and this is something that makes each culture unique in difference too. This is the knowledge that each culture has, the techniques and the tools that they have to make things and to transform whatever resources, wood, metals, food, whatever, into usable forms, and the knowledge and the skills required to use them after they've been developed. And so each culture has their own developed technology. Now, we share a lot of technology in today's world than what we used to, but some technology is very unique to different cultures. Now, when we look at some of the kinds of, material cultures and non-culture, and, we have different ceremonies and how we have weddings and how we express them religiously are unique around cultures. It's what makes everyone, in terms of their culture, different and not the same. So when we think about culture, we also have to think about symbols. When we think about symbols, symbols are things that stand for other things. If you think about love, we often associate it with the image of a heart. Not a beating heart, but the shape of a heart. Peace and a dove. Hate, the Nazi swastika. The emergency of a siren. Anger and hostility, we raise the middle finger. We know what that means. We're not saying, hey, I love you. For female, we associate pink, and for males, we associate blue. These are symbolic. Symbols are anything that meaningfully represents something else. It can function to produce loyalty or even animosity, love or hate. The key is that there may be one symbol, but it could be interpreted by various cultures differently. Media commercials for beer, clothing, cosmetics, and medications depict who their market is and what it is that's desirable about their product. And so you can notice how they choose to use their symbols if you pay attention to it. Now, when we also think about culture, we think about language. And there's a set of symbols that express ideas that enable people to think and communicate with one another. And this is what we call language. It's symbolic. I mean, if you look at Chinese, if you look at Arabic, if you look at any other language, they are just symbols. And these symbols represent things that can be expressed verbally, or we can even express them non-verbally. So we have two kinds. We have verbal and non-verbal. So when we think about components of culture, we can also include values. Values are very important in distinguishing one culture from another. These are collective ideas about what is right or wrong, good or bad, desirable, undesirable in a particular culture. This could include things like health, good health, intelligence, knowledge, freedom. Commonly held values hold societies together as well as set them apart. Now, some of the elements of values that they are criteria by which we evaluate others and objects and events. They're often in pairs of opposites like good and bad, brave and cowardly, hardworking and lazy. And they are very general in orientation. Now, when you think about values, we can consider that there are some core Canadian values, and these were from 2009, and these are core Canadian values that as a society in Canada, we value these as important, what distinguishes us as Canadians. Now, when we carry on with components of culture, we can look at a number of things. Now, we can include in this norms. Norms are established rules of behavior. These are standards of conduct. Now, this could be, for example, how we interact with one another, how we greet one another, how we drive our cars on the right side of the road, and it becomes very important in terms of our typical behavior. Now, when we look at our norms, there are both, formal norms and informal norms. Formal are written down as laws. And, when you break the law, you get a fine. So these norms are formal. The informal or unwritten standards of behavior are understood by people who share a common identity. Smoking, we don't necessarily value it as much as we maybe at once did, so to not smoke, we value not smoking, good health and politeness. The norm is now becoming where to smoke or smoking etiquette. Marriage is a value that we have in Canadian society, even though we have a high rate of divorce and a high rate of second marriages indicate that we value marriage, and people still favor marriage as a family style or family form. The norm tells us how to be a good husband or how to be a good wife. So for these laws or these norms are enforced by sanctions, and they can be rewarded for appropriate behavior and punished for inappropriate behavior. Now, if we carry on some of these examples in terms of what else is there, there are folkways, mores, and laws. So folkways are these informal norms of everyday customs that may be violated without serious consequences within a particular culture. So for example, a folkway of brushing your teeth is kind of something we expect people to do, and if you didn't brush your teeth, as though it wouldn't be very pleasant, there's no law that says you have to. It's a folkway, it's an informal norm. There's a sort of generalized understanding that good hygiene is valued. The kinds of clothing that we wear. I don't wear long pants, so in the wintertime people routinely want to correct me about the kind of weather and how I should be dressing. The gestures that we use, these are folkways. They're informal ways of customs in which we can express ourselves. The religious fasting, these aren't laws, but they are things that we would adhere to. The kinds of cars that we buy or the color of car we prefer. Now, mores, these are strongly held norms with a moral or ethical connotation that may or may not be violated without serious consequences in a particular culture. Now, they are more usually focused on sexual morality and what we call taboos. Incest would be an example of a taboo that would fit in the mores. And then lastly, of course, we mentioned previously was formal standardized norms that have been enacted by legislature and are enforced by formal sanctions, or what we call laws. And these are all found within, if you will, this element of culture, because the laws aren't the same across the world. They're unique to each culture, and what we accept as normal, law-abiding behavior isn't necessarily a universal standard across the world. So here's a graphic that looks at essentially codes of behavior. We have values, which lead to the kinds of things that we call our norms. So our values sort of are the foundation, starting point by which we form our norms. Norms can be folkways, mores, which can also include taboos, and laws. Now this is what we're going to cover in the first section of culture in week 3. So now you've got that. I hope you've enjoyed it, and hope you have a chance to get through your textbook and get caught up on some material that will help you prepare for the test coming up in what is it, week 4, I think, or week 5. Sorry, I don't have my syllabus right in front of me. So I hope this is going well for you. I hope the semester is unfolding well, and please enjoy yourself, and thank you. Bye now.